Good morning. Tensions flaring again over the Strait of Hormuz over the weekend. The AI index, the AI2 index, excuse me, posted one of its biggest weeks last week ever, as several sectors that I track had substantial gains from semiconductors to optical to even to quantum computing. Some of the quantum computing stocks breaking out with huge moves last week. We'll see what happens this week. One of my top little pieces here, AMD, Advanced Micro Devices, with its best run in 20 years, up 30% in 12 days, one of the holdings in our AI2 portfolio. And with the big rally in artificial intelligence stocks last week, our AI2 portfolio has now completed a substantial run from negative 3% during one of the late March lows, up to over 30% at the close on Friday. So very pleased with the results. And for AI2 members, we're going to have some work to get done a little bit later this afternoon. So hope everyone is having a great day. I'm John Hutchinson with Traders Reserve. This is Breakfast Club for Monday, April 22nd. Let's see what's happening. First off, mostly futures are down and oil is up. That's not any different really than what we saw throughout March. But what is a little bit different, we'll see how the market actually opens. But futures have been largely stable overnight, down about 0.5%, pretty much across the board. I don't know what will happen in the Strait of Hormuz, but we are coming up on the end of the 2-week ceasefire, this between Tuesday and Wednesday. If there's no further escalation beyond what's taken place, and if the ceasefire is extended or maintained, I think you'll see Wall Street continue to look past this, even if oil rises. And it may not be as much of a rally as we saw over the last 10 days, 10, 12 days. But I do think you'll see at least some stability return to the market. We are coming into heavy earnings period for technology, especially. So because of my exposure in artificial intelligence, my personal preference is that the status quo is maintained in the Middle East, because that's the only way that we will be able to get a true read on Wall Street's reaction to key earnings upcoming, not just for stocks that we hold in the AI2 portfolio, but also across the tech stack. Your Mag 7, Apple, Microsoft, Google, et cetera, as well as all of the specialty stocks in semiconductors and others. So we do have a couple of stocks due this week in Lam Research, which reports Tuesday, and Max Linear, which reports Thursday. I'll cover Max Linear again here in just a couple of minutes. But really, what we saw last week is Wall Street went full risk on in artificial intelligence. That moved the AI2 index from, it had been slightly ahead of the markets, but still largely negative on the year. Excuse me, but literally flipped to plus 11% on the year across the full 359 stocks in the 356 stocks, excuse me, for the AI2 index. So currently ahead of the S&P by about 4%, 4 or 5% for both the S&P and the NASDAQ. One of the biggest areas, as I mentioned just a moment ago, quantum computing stocks, IonQ with a 60% move last week. Yep, legitimate 60% move in 1 week. So again, it's always difficult to try to cherry pick a single stock, but as long as we stay in this space, and you'll see some examples of this, the stocks in artificial intelligence continue to move, and they move higher, faster than the general market. When Wall Street wants risk exposure, they are looking at artificial intelligence. That is where they're going. So with that in mind, let's take a look at what happened last week. And in particular, hang on, I'm trying to get back to a different screen in the background here. You can see the sort of the stair-step recovery that has taken place in our AI2 portfolio. That's just from late March to, or from early April to last week. So covering about a 10, 11-day period. It's just an absolute run for all of the stocks. And last week alone, 6 stocks with double-digit gains on the week, highlighted by MaxLinear with a near 27% move in 1 week. You can see AMD, part of that 30% move was a 12% gain for last week. New 52-week highs across a number of stocks that were both trading that we own in the AI2 portfolio and throughout the AI2 index. Another big move in Semiconductor, which turned that stock from a negative to a double-digit positive. And Coherent, it continues to add to its gains for the quarter. SEMO and ASX are both foreign stocks that we hold, and both had significant performance last week as well. Not as good as IonQ's 60%, but considering that we're stacking up gains on a regular basis, very, very pleased with the overall recovery and performance. All of the stocks in our AI2 portfolio are now in the green. So we'll be covering that a little bit later today during our live briefing. But if we take a look at sort of like a big picture here, a couple of key things. As I said, we have the escalation, Iran firing on a ship, the U.S. Navy turning back and firing on an Iranian ship. I don't know how all of this ends, but the biggest thing really is whether or not the two sides step back from the brink and do not re-engage on a military basis. That is what Wall Street will care most about, because everything else is negotiation as far as Wall Street is concerned. So for your trading this week, we will still have a similar narrative to what we've seen over the last 8 weeks, which is oil up, markets down, but maybe not down as much or as fast as they were in many of the previous sessions. And any improvement leads to oil down, stocks up. So the key thing here really is whether or not we can maintain that ceasefire. That to me is all that matters. But artificial intelligence with just a massive breakout last week, and for AMD, I'll cover this a little bit more in a second. But there was an announcement of a partnership between AMD and France, which gives France sovereign artificial intelligence. The key here is the news flow keeps getting more positive at the single stock level, even as overall media still tends to treat many of the stories around artificial intelligence in the negative. Taiwan Semiconductor with a blowout quarter, plus 50%, 58% year over year, record profit, raised forward guidance for 2026. Micron, the same story that I've been sort of sharing with you over the full year here, the calendar year so far. Their high bandwidth memory for 2026 sold out. Now their high bandwidth memory for 2027 is sold out. And now they are already taking orders for 2028. And as I've stressed before for Micron, their new orders are longer term contracts to guarantee memory delivery into the future, anywhere from 3 to 5 year contracts. So that's an entirely different revenue set, a floor for Micron. And I would not be surprised to see that repeated throughout the memory, storage, and semiconductor chip market. MaxLinear had a huge run last week. Most of that, almost half of that move was on Friday alone. Huge short squeeze. I'll cover some of the details on that, but much of it around a very specific application of what MaxLinear does as it relates to Samsung, number one. There was a second reason, but I'll share that here in just a second. But as I said, 6 of our positions were up double digits just in 1 week. And the overall performance is really telling me that when Wall Street wants to take on risk, They are looking at artificial intelligence. They are looking at the supply chain and AI core areas. That's anything from semiconductors to optical components, battery and energy, anything that saves energy, so to speak. That's where the money is flowing, and I don't see that really changing in at least in the next quarter, maybe 2 quarters. Mainly because we're still building, so we're not done. We're still in the early innings and the first stage of uh, the expansion of artificial intelligence. So it's not a surprise to me. I think the speed of the gains would be a surprise to me. But the fact that many of the companies in the index posted strong gains last week is not. Other names to keep your eyes on: Western Digital, Seagate Technology, SanDisk, all enjoying very strong demand, and none of that is changing. So I talked about AMD and the French connection. AMD hit all-time highs last week, up above the 270 level. As a reminder, a couple of weeks ago, AMD was trading at 190. So that's an $80 per share turnaround in just over a couple of weeks. And AMD had been sitting at or below the, call it between the 190, 205 level for since their previous earnings report. Either that was a very long base building by institutional investors, which is possible. But the latest news, and they've had a couple of positive news items, but the latest news really pushed AMD substantially higher. So again, against the backdrop of the Iran stuff, if we get that out of the way, we would be able to see whether that has forward momentum. My price target on AMD is still up in the 300s right now, so we're still a good distance away from that target. But that flipped AMD in our portfolio from a negative to a positive, and to a larger double-digit gain overall on AMD. Broadcom followed a similar pattern last week, based on other deals that Broadcom has announced, an impending deal with Google. And so Broadcom finally breaking out of a long range that it had been in. But AMD really is the number two behind NVIDIA. Really, they're the one company. I'm sorry, it's similar to Micron. Micron is number two behind SK Hynix in the memory chip market. AMD is number two behind NVIDIA in the GPU and CPU chip processing. So if AMD can continue to grow even as the number two, this is a stock story that has a much longer, the pages in the book run much longer before the book ends. So I'd like to see a really good quarter from them when they announce here in the next couple of weeks. But this deal with France gives them a higher revenue floor than Wall Street had previously priced in, and this is the type of thing that keeps happening across artificial intelligence stocks. New deals are announced, not necessarily at a sovereign or country level, but new deals to produce specific chips for different companies like Google or for Amazon or for Microsoft, et cetera. And this is raising the floor for future revenue for many of these chip companies, that's semiconductor chips or memory chips, and even storage companies. So this certainly has not played out yet, and the overall outlook for AMD is getting stronger. And we were a little early, but not too early. But most importantly, we have a very strong gain in the AMD, and we'll just keep building on it. But ultimately, as long as AMD can continue to build on these types of deals, I think you're going to continue to see this stock as another one growing higher in overall price. And the way that this is kind of affecting the entire chip chain. Taiwan Semiconductor, the one of the leading fabricators of chips, uh, with their huge earnings announcement, even though the stock was actually down on their earnings. Wall Street may have had higher expectations for their year over year earnings growth, or Wall Street pulled the stock down slightly because of increased capital expenditure. For many of these companies, this is becoming a consistent story. They are increasing the money that they are putting back into the the expansion of capacity, because they can't meet current supply demand. Right, the ability to balance out supply and demand right now is the most important challenge across the entire memory chip, semiconductor chip sector. And it's out of balance right now. Demand is far outpacing supply. Supply can't keep up. So Micron, in their previous earnings announcement in March, said that they were increasing their capital expenditures from 20 to 25 billion, and they had recently announced a new plant. AMD doing similar, increasing capital expenditure. Taiwan Semiconductor, increasing capital expenditure. So the worry that Wall Street keeps having is the excess money being spent to meet the current demands. The question Wall Street asks is, does that have a life cycle? Meaning, is there an end point where demand suddenly declines and now you have an oversupply? And that used to be the case for semiconductors. That's why semiconductors were typically cyclical. Right now, we're in the middle of what would be a multi-year trend for semiconductors, for memory chips. So if you're looking for trade ideas, even if you're selling options or buying stock, semiconductors are, to me, the first place to start. That's why our AI2 portfolio is a little more heavily invested on the semiconductor side. This story has been building since the beginning of the year. We just happened to be positioned correctly when it started to hit. So the Micron and On Semiconductor, two beneficiaries downstream of everything that's taking place in the chip chain, and we saw On Semiconductor last week with a massive move, literally almost a 30-point move in 1 week, from $50 to $80 a share. And much of that is because they benefit from Taiwan Semiconductor. They're a partner with the company. Bank of America recently upgraded the stock to an $85 price target. And ultimately, what we're seeing is these price targets across many of these companies in the semiconductor space, especially, being raised. So Micron had their price targets raised anywhere from $700 to $800 a share. And Lumentum, another stock that we hold in the optical realm, had their price target range increased to $950 a share. So Wall Street is starting to pay more attention, and that explains why last week saw more risk capital move into the artificial intelligence space versus the broader market as a whole. And I don't think that changes anywhere in the near future. One of the other companies that's starting to get better is CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike was a trade in Income Masters, and I feel like there's a slide missing. There it is. MaxLinear, that was the one that I was missing. Sorry. MaxLinear had a huge breakout on Friday, which was both breakout and short squeeze. Stock moving up 12.5% overall, up as much as 16% on Friday. This is a stock that we do hold in the AI2 portfolio. It is a small cap, but it's an under the radar small cap. But there were three pieces of news that hit around MaxLinear on Friday. One had to do with too technical to bother to explain, but a piece of their technology that directly affects Samsung's ability to compete in the artificial intelligence space, where MaxLinear is the only supplier that has the ability to fulfill what Samsung needs. That is, again, a revenue floor increase. But the second and larger story was and let's remember, it's by the rumor a by the rumor type approach is whether or not Max Linear is a potential acquisition target. Uh, and the acquisition price was floated as being between $35 and $50 a share. The stock closed at just under $27 a share on Friday. And so that news helped propel the stock up substantially. That rumor, excuse me, the rumor that the company was an acquisition target, but there were no names, no specifics, right? It's speculation. So I wouldn't be surprised for Max Linear to pull back a little bit this week. But at the same time, all of the news right now is positive. They beat their earnings in January. They've had price target increases. They are essentially one of the strongest players in their, call it, little space. We do have a binary event on Thursday called earnings. We'll see how that plays out. But the company has been consistent in their earnings performance. And given their their report in first quarter, I would expect them to outperform for their Q1 2026 earnings, which were reported here this week on Thursday. So if they beat earnings, beat revenue, and raise forward guidance, this is a stock that I see trading in the low to mid 30s over the next month, maybe month and a half at the longest. But the stock is a little extended right now, so it needs a little bit of a cool off. But with earnings on the horizon, I don't necessarily expect like a 20% move on earnings. Not on the earnings day, but I do expect that the stock will continue to add momentum higher as we go into the month of May and ultimately into the month of June. So that was the one that I missed. And back to Income Masters, longer dated trade on CrowdStrike finally closing, a little over 60 days, but a very successful trade for Income Masters members across multiple roles, capturing a little over $2,600. So even here, trading around the AI space, this has proven profitable for the option sellers. Overall, $3,600 in cash from Income Masters last week, and the 30% total unrealized total gain in AI2 made last week a very good week. Let's see if we can't build on that and have another this week. So again, Iran front page news that will dominate the news cycle today. Maybe tomorrow, but I'd keep my eye on AMD and see whether or not that stock continues to build on its recent breakout. Great news for our AI2 portfolio and the supply chain operating independently of oil prices and to a degree, some of the overall fears about the conflict in the Middle East. We'll see if that continues this week. That'll be the focus of our talk today at 4 p.m. in the AI2 Insiders. A reminder to check your email, the invitations to join for a 90-day trial out there for AI2 Insiders. We'll be making some changes to the portfolio in short order, so you'll certainly be able to take part in the next round of gains that we're able to produce for investors. So with that, I will say thank you for joining me for Breakfast Club today. And we will be back next Monday with whatever the news transpires this week and whatever ideas I can come up with for you by next Monday. Thanks for joining me, John Hutchinson. Have a great day. And for AI2 folks, I will see you a little bit later this afternoon.